Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 16th of November 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives and, of course, on a Friday, David Scott with Northern Exposure. But all eyes centred on Westminster, Mike.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to apologise right up front because we're going to have a couple of clips of Theresa May here. I'm going to start off with her statement that she made yesterday. Well, there are a couple of important points she made in the first couple of sentences here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I would like to update the House on our negotiations to leave the European Union. First, I want to pay tribute to my right honourable friends, the members for Esher and Walton and Tatton. Delivering Brexit involves difficult choices for all of us. We do not agree on all of those choices, but I respect their views and I would like to thank them sincerely for all that they have done. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we agreed the provisional terms of our exit from the European Union, set out in the draft withdrawal agreement. We also agreed the broad terms of our future relationship in an outline political declaration. President Juncker has now written to the President of the European Council to recommend that decisive progress has been made in the negotiations, and a special European Council will be called for Sunday the 25th of November. This puts us close to a Brexit deal. Mr. Speaker, what we agreed yesterday was not the final deal. It is a draft treaty. It is a draft treaty that means that we will leave the EU in a smooth and orderly way on the 29th of March 2019, and which sets the framework for a future relationship that delivers in our national interest. It takes back control of our borders, laws and money. It protects jobs, security and the integrity of the United Kingdom, and it delivers in ways that many said could simply not be done. We were told that we...
So that's what she said yesterday, and the first thing that struck me there, Brian, was that she talked about the draft agreement itself, and she talked about an outline political declaration about the future relationship with the European Union. So I thought, well, okay, they've published these two documents, they're in the public domain, now journalists have them, they must be on the government website. So I went and had a look at number 10, and the number 10 website indeed had her statement from the House of Commons that she made yesterday, but when you go and look at the House of Commons, at that page, there's no link to the draft agreement. Okay, so I went to the BBC and here's what they had. They had a thing yesterday saying, Brexit, what does the draft withdrawal agreement reveal? And in the first couple of sentences of this, they do link to a PDF document, which is available on the government website, but it does not seem to be linked from any of the relevant pages on the government website. So this seems to be secret as far as the public are concerned. The only chance that the public has to get access to what this document says is to listen to the coverage or to read the coverage on the BBC or in the mainstream press. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Well, if we look at what some people are saying about this, because obviously the one area which isn't, but we'll come on to the types of things that are being discussed in the press on the draft agreement in a minute. But the one thing that isn't being discussed, if we bring David Scott into the programme straight away here, David, is the issue of the military. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg here suggesting that there are hidden surprises, and you're asking, what do you mean, like EU military unification?
Yeah, Jacob Rees-Mogg here was retweeting an article written by Lee Rotherham of Brexit Central, and this had gone through the documentation in some detail, quite quickly, but in some detail, and had identified some surprises within the text. But the big surprise that wasn't being talked about is EU military unification. In fact, when we go to let's have a quick look here at Lee Rotherham, right? So this is what his own websites say about him. Dr. Lee Rotherham is one of this country's preeminent thinkers on Brexit. He was Conservative delegate to the Convention of the Future of Europe and delegate to the Council of Europe. So he's extremely well qualified in all matters of Brexit. He's a post-referendum executive director of Veterans for Britain, and he's a reservist in the British Army and has served 3 overseas deployments. So you would think defence and the Army, Navy and Air Force would be foremost in his considerations, but well, not really, because what we've got here, as we delve into his article, which is quite long, he's talking about, well, what's he talking about? Sort of quirks of the text, okay? So he's saying, well, okay, some Eurosceptics might be reassured by the deal here, and it works for a time until you hit the most remarkable paragraph in Article 132, where the drafters can barely commit to finally leaving the EU this century. Here's what it says, quote, notwithstanding Article 126, the Joint Committee may before 1 July 2020 adopt a single decision extending the transition period up to, and it's in brackets to be agreed later, 31st of December 20 XX, 20 variable, so anything up to 2099. And he makes that point. But this is quite a small point, because yes, it could be anything, but it could simply be a date that's not yet agreed, and it is a draft document, and it's not going to hit the Chequers deal very hard. Meanwhile, EU military unification is going on apace. So what does he say about defence? And it's really very quiet what he says about defence. He writes, on defence again, the long-term ambition is, quote, collaboration on relevant current and future projects of the European Defence Agency through an administrative arrangement, participation in the European Defence Fund supported projects, and collaboration in permanent structured cooperation projects where invited on an exceptional basis under the conditions of the Union law. He quotes from the document. And then he says, so not exactly clear blue water here, in an area where we have seen in the past few days alone, President Macron and Chancellor Merkel waxing lyrical on EU military aggregation. Meanwhile, we see a pledge to participate in the EU's civil protection mechanism rather than the counterpart UN scheme. So he talks about aggregation, not unification, aggregation, because aggregation is gradual. Aggregation is in the long grass. Right? And then he says, oh, squirrel, let's look at some other subject here. A very strange way of putting it. Now, he can't ignore the issue completely, but he's trying to bury that as an issue. Why?
Good question. Now, we'll bring David Ellis in a second, but just before we do, I want to go through a couple of items here, because the question is, what does it actually say in the draft agreement about defence? Well, here is the front page of the draft agreement, and it says, in the event the Union, that's the European Union, and the United Kingdom reach an agreement governing their future relationship in the areas of common foreign and security policy and the common security and defence policy, which becomes applicable during the transition period, Chapter 2 of Title 5 of the Maastricht Treaty and the acts adopted on the basis of those provisions shall cease to apply to the United Kingdom for the date of application of that agreement. So in the draft agreement itself, the draft deal, there's absolutely nothing about defence, operational defence issues, right? But David Ellis, you wanted to highlight these couple of tweets from Veterans for Britain. And it's the second one that I'm going to come on to in a second, but what grabbed your attention about these?
Well, this is sort of black and white stuff now, isn't it? You know, we've got these guys here at Veterans for Britain, David Banks, that's Roger Lane Knott, Julian Thompson, Royal Marine Major General, and he's talking about transfer of swathes of British military sovereignty to the EU Commission is guaranteed via May's exit plan. Well, there's obviously the you know, it's not an exit, it's Brexit without the exit. But it's very clear to me that now this proposal has been put out there that we've got a continuation of the same modus operandi. Silence from the MPs on it. You can't get really the proper details until you go to the EU and you look at it that end. And we've got all the would-be people sort of skirting around here and using completely the wrong words. If we cited really what this is, because the no change aspect where May is talking about security, now security is defence, because this is one of the flip-flop words that they tend to use so people don't grasp what's really going on. So defence is military. The no change aspect in the draft proposal that's into the House at the moment means that there's a continuation of agreement to the military structures already agreed to, which equates to military union or defence union. So that is the direction of travel. So it's a classic creeping of sovereignty, military sovereignty, without anything really specifically definitive that people can latch onto easily. Because what they're not saying is right, we're announcing a policy of going into military union. We think that's a good idea. They won't do that because they know damn well that the British people won't support it. So that's why they're going about it in this very underhanded, deceitful, and absolutely reprehensible manner that Admiral Roger Lane Knott has been alluding to on his Twitter feed.
Right, well, hold that thought. Now, the key point here in the second tweet is it says, for 2 years, Veterans for Britain here saying this, for 2 years, defence industry refused to believe us when we said ministers were trying to keep EU defence rules and policies. The rules are too damaging, they said. Ministers would have told us, they said. Yet here it is, government finally reveals this devastating truth. So in the draft agreement is Article 75, and it says, for the purposes of this title, relevant rules means the general principles of union law applicable to the award of public contracts, and they cite a particular directive. They cite a particular directive there, which is Directive 2009/81/EC of the European Parliament and of the Council of 13th July 2009 on the coordination procedures for the award of certain works contracts, supply contracts and service contracts by contracting authorities or entities in the field of defence and security. So exactly what has this tied us into?
This is tying us into the lock, stock and barrel arrangement of defence and military union. It's all in. It's military and the industry. It's a single point command and control of everything. That's the whole gambit.
And this particular directive is procurement then.
Yeah, well, this is going down the kit route. We're gonna tie in all of the capital and operational budgetary procurement policy into the single point command and control, the framework of military union. It's all in. But of course, this proposal that's there doesn't articulate that part. It just says no change in continuation. But fair play to Veterans for Britain there for highlighting it in black and white, that now this is out in the open. This is a proper cat out of the bag moment, really, for everyone.
Okay, and Brian, the MPs, I mean, this is a bit pathetic, isn't it?
I just picked up on this because Steve Baker has made himself known with Brexit in quite a big way. And here he is tweeting out scary stuff, but 17.4 million people ignored the prophet of doom. So my reply underneath on the left-hand, one of those two tweet sequences, is what's scary, Steve, is that backbench MPs are now out of the loop. Everything controlled by backdoor cabinet office deals, MPs and the public in the dark. And I've sent him over our EU thing. But here we've got MPs, and look at what he says on the right. My advice is to keep calm and carry on. The Treasury and their acolytes were laughably wrong last time. They're talking about the future of the country, and he's casually saying, well, the Treasury were in control and they got it laughably wrong last time. I stamped over the top of this that the Treasury and the cabinet acolytes are running the whole show at the moment. The MPs have no idea what's going on. We've had Johnny Mercer admitting he wasn't too sure what was happening in Parliament. Steve Baker doesn't know. And yet he's saying keep calm and carry on. We should be pinning our MPs to the wall to demand to know what's going on and getting these papers out in the open, Mike, that you're clearly showing are not being...
Well, we haven't even scratched the surface yet, right? Because let's go back to this BBC article that we showed a few seconds ago, because that BBC article links to the draft agreement that Theresa May is talking about, but it doesn't link to the outlined political declaration on the future relationship with the European Union. And indeed, there's no link on the UK government website that I can find, certainly not on the Number 10 website. I would have expected the links to these documents to be underneath her or within the text of her her speech that she gave yesterday, but no. So we can run through that article, and there are no links to the other document there. It's just not there. So where did we have to go to find it? Well, we had to go to the European Commission website, where it is linked down at the bottom here. So if anybody wants to go and find it, they can. So let's have a look at what this document says. So here we go. They're saying this is an outline of the political declaration setting out the framework for the future relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as agreed at negotiators level on the 14th November 2018. So the origin of this is the European Commission Task Force for the preparation of the conduct of the negotiations with the United Kingdom, Article 50. And it was sent to all the EU 27 member states. And let's look at what it says about defence. It says close and flexible, scalable cooperation on external action at the bilateral and international level, ensuring that the UK can combine efforts with the Union to the greatest effect, including in times of crisis, when serious incidents occur, respecting the autonomy of both parties. Now, if anybody any of our members have seen David Ellis's presentation from the emergency briefing a week or two ago, this is one thing that David particularly highlighted, this issue of times of crisis. I'll get David to comment on this in a second, but I'm going to run through a couple of these. It follows on by saying structured consultation and regular thematic dialogues at various levels, and invitations for the United Kingdom to participate in informal sessions of the Union's council meetings where appropriate. So the UK will still take part, they're saying, in informal European Council meetings. Of course, the council meetings are the meetings of heads of state or government. So we're in or not we're in, or we're not in. We're not quite sure exactly what the status is there. It goes on to say cooperation in third countries, including a consular provision and protection, and in international organisations and fora, notably in the United Nations, possibly to support each other's positions where relevant, including through agreed statements, démarches and shared positions. Well, this is Theresa May's rapid reaction mechanism that she launched at the G7. The European Union absolutely on board with that, no problem. For some reason, this came under the area of defence. Not quite clear why this came under that particular area. Is it that there's going to be some common narrative with regard to some common enemy in the future? I don't know, but that's where it appeared. It goes on to say consultation on sanctions with intensified exchange of information where foreign policy objectives are aligned, with the possibility of adopting mutually reinforcing sanctions. Theresa May mentioned that in the Commons yesterday. Where foreign policy objectives are aligned. So some of the language here absolutely implies that there's distinct separation, but we'll come on to this in a second to show why there isn't. But it goes on, participation by the United Kingdom on a case-by-case basis in common security and defence policy missions and operations through a framework participation agreement with intensified interaction at relevant planning stages proportionate to the level of the United Kingdom's contribution. Now, we don't know what this framework participation agreement is going to be. We don't know what its form it's going to take. And we don't quite know what the definition of the United Kingdom's participation or contribution means. Does this mean a financial contribution, or does it mean a contribution in terms of men and material? We're not really sure. And it goes on to say collaboration by the United Kingdom in relevant current and future projects of the European Defence Agency through an administrative agreement. So we've got an administrative agreement on the EDA, but we don't know what that administrative agreement is going to be. Participation of the United Kingdom entities in European Defence Fund supported projects. Well, if we're going to participate in European Defence Fund supported projects, we're going to have to pay into the European Defence Fund. So there's money involved in that. And collaboration by the United Kingdom in permanent structured cooperation projects where invited on an exceptional basis. So the implication here is that the UK is not going to sign up as a full-time member, but the UK would be invited where the EU decided that would be a sensible thing to do. Now, in the House of Commons then, in order to sort of downplay all this stuff, at least that's David Ellis's assessment, as we'll hear in a second. In order to downplay that stuff, Nicholas Soames stood up and asked Theresa May a question. So let's hear that.
Mr. Speaker, may I congratulate the Prime Minister on her exceptional efforts to honour the result of the referendum and to achieve a deal with the European Union under the most difficult and demanding circumstances. And will she elaborate on the scale and breadth of the future partnerships agreed on security and defence?
Prime Minister.
I'm happy to do that for my right honourable friend. There are two areas in relation to security. One, of course, is internal security, on which I've answered a number of questions, where we intend to maintain cooperation in a number of areas where we're currently working very closely with our European partners. The other is in external security and defence. And we will have, obviously, our independent foreign policy. It will be for our decisions. But what we have negotiated and is set out in the outline political declaration is an ability for the United Kingdom, where it makes sense to do so, to work with our European partners on matters of security and defence, and on issues like the imposition of sanctions, where it makes sense for those sanctions actually to be wider than simply the European Union, and the UK to be part of that. We will have our independent ability to deliver on sanctions, but we will cooperate with our partners in the European Union. That is what retains our independence, but also ensures that we're able to act at all times in the best interests of the United Kingdom and the best interests of maintaining our security and defence.
So, David, that maintains our independence, does it?
Really? No, it doesn't. Maybe she's believing the script that she's being served up. Certainly the House is duped. Right, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with what's known in the trade as a whipped scripted question from Soames there. He's effectively throwing the Prime Minister a closed-looped question and answer. So he's throwing her a bone to allow her to voice this, so it doesn't really raise any proper questions or any proper alarm or scrutiny. So what do we know already? We know that parliamentary reserved scrutiny powers have been circumvented. Now that takes some doing. We've not had a vote, we've not had a debate, it's all been done behind closed doors. Well, why is that? Okay, so this is our fundamental problem. You cannot fight something that doesn't have a name, okay? So they're not referring to this as currency union, it's got a name. They're not referring to it as customs union, it's got a name. They're not referring to it as any kind of border issue. All right, what we're dealing with is military unification, military union, a unitary authority in charge of single point command and control of all the defence services in the EU zone. So they won't call it defence union or military union because it would give it a name, and then people would know what it is within 1/10 of a second. What we have, as you've very well articulated there, is a bureaucratic freight train of paperwork and EU spiel. There are pages of this stuff because what they can't do is give it the name. So they're giving it a freight train of stuff. So you trawl through all this stuff and all you end up doing is getting very, very confused because it's neither in, it's neither out. It's sort of left leg in, left leg out, in, out, shake it all about. You know, they're doing the okey cokey here, political okey cokey with defence union, military union. So we're still dealing with a whipped silence. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. Don't talk about that. And they're not giving, the MPs haven't grasped this, that if they just used the phrase military or defence union, it would all come undone very, very quickly. So this is the key thing that everybody's got to take away. They're giving us pages and pages of this stuff. I mean, Theresa May talking there about security. Well, security really means defence, really means military union. A co-op really means defence, really means military union. And, we're going to have, coming and going as we please. We still retain our independence. Utter nonsense.
Right.
Utter nonsense.
Okay. Well, David, look, something else that I think is really important here. We cannot, in order to understand the context of all this, we cannot exclude Britain's relationship with France on defence. Now, the 2010 treaties, the Lancaster House treaties, began that. But of course, in January this year, we had the Franco-British summit, which took place in Sandhurst. And there was a declaration came out of that. And there was even a separate defence section came out of that. So let's just have a look and see what that said. We stress, this is just one paragraph out of this thing. They said, we stress the need to further develop the emergence of a shared strategic culture between European states. France and the UK, thanks to the robust common expeditionary experience, have agreed that their bilateral defence relationship would contribute to the development of the European Intervention Initiative. This is intended to create among a group of European nations the conditions for future engagements on various military intervention scenarios. This is just one item taken out of this document. There's dozens of them where we are tied into France extremely deeply, and whether or not we're directly tied into the various EU military unification infrastructure like PESCO and CARD and these other things, whether we're tied into those directly or not, by the fact that we have these treaties with France, we are tied into that stuff, David.
This is absolutely correct. This is exactly as Brian has forecast. It's exactly as we forecast. You know, we're completely vindicated now on our side that all this was correct. You know, when you tie in what's happened this week with May's proposal and what's here in the black and white in this Franco-British arrangement, you've perfectly articulated there to everyone that this is blatantly apparent that tying into France is actually tying into the EU. Full stop. So what we're looking at here is as we've said, the switches for them to do it are crisis, and it'll be the EU that designates the crisis. Once they do that, it's a self-fulfilling protocol that there will be a taking of command, and you know this European, and there's the key there in the phrase you've just mentioned, that the European Intervention Force. It's European intervention. It's not British government intervention or British military intervention. It'll be European, which we are tied into. But then once again, we're dealing with this problem that they're not heading it as military union or defence union for fear of what the British public, in a majority, will quickly say no, no, no to. So, you know, I'm just gonna close with one comment on this, because obviously we did a lot with David Davis the previous week. Has anyone seen David Davis this week?
That's a very good question. Now, Brian, that's completely gone over my head. What were you going to?
No, well, I was just going to stress it isn't just they're using this special language, David, in order that the British public doesn't understand. It's now clear that some backbench MPs who have remarkably still got brains, if they could see what was actually happening, they would actually be speaking out, but they can't see what's happening because they either don't get the documents, or they get the documents but they don't understand the language. And so this is deceit on a massive scale. Who is running it? It's the Cabinet Office and the Treasury, and of course the banking powers that have got their money in the till of the British nation. It's the Pearl Office, as you have described.
Well, look, so that's defence. What about the rest? Of course, the biggest issue with the rest of it is the customs arrangements. So here's what Mr. Corbyn had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement. The withdrawal agreement and the outline political declaration represent a huge and damaging failure. After 2 years of bungled negotiations, the government has produced a botched deal that breaches the Prime Minister's own red lines and does not meet our 6 tests. The government, Mr. Speaker, is in chaos. Their deal risks leaving the country in an indefinite halfway house without a real say.
So David Scott, if we could bring you back in at this point, this is the key point, isn't it? This customs arrangement that apparently we've entered into, if this draft agreement goes through, is open-ended. And as we highlighted on Wednesday's programme, they are talking about having some kind of so-called independent commission or body which would decide when it's appropriate for us to withdraw from that. But the key point is there is no end date for it.
Yes, and this is where, as disappointing as people like Jacob Rees-Mogg have been on EU military unification, really he's been silent. He's actually been quite good on the economic case. because the economic case is we joined the EU, everything got more expensive because we weren't trading with the world, we weren't trading with the former empire, we weren't trading with the Commonwealth, we weren't trading with countries like New Zealand, we were trading with the French. And it was all very highly regulated and expensive. And his point on economics is that has to be undone utterly if the people in this country who voted for Brexit are actually going to get the advantage that they were voting for, namely less pressure on their lives in a whole host of ways. And yet this doesn't seem to be delivered at all.
Yeah, indeed. So as yesterday progressed, it was quite amusing. The whole thing became chaotic very, very quickly with resignations after resignations and so on. And eventually it was announced that Theresa May was going to give a statement at 5 p.m. and there was lots of speculation, is she going to resign? Because in the meantime, Jacob Rees-Mogg had released his letter of no confidence, and this started various letters of no confidence coming through. But she gave this statement, and the BBC and others are presenting this as her digging her heels in and taking a strong stand. But let's just listen briefly to what she, I do apologise once again for having Theresa back on, but let's just listen briefly to what she had to say.
Negotiating the UK's withdrawal from the EU after 40 years and building from the ground up a new and enduring relationship for the good of our children and grandchildren is a matter of the highest consequence. It touches almost every area of our national life, our whole economy and virtually every job, the livelihoods of our fellow citizens, our integrity as a United Kingdom of 4 nations, our safety and security. All of these are at stake. My approach throughout has been to put the national interest first, not a partisan interest, and certainly not my own political interest. I do not judge harshly those of my colleagues who seek to do the same, but who reach a different conclusion. They must do what they believe to be right, just as I do. I'm sorry that they've chosen to leave the government, and I thank them for their service. But I believe with every fibre of my being that the course I have set out is the right one for our country and all our people. From the very beginning, I have known what I wanted to deliver for the British people, to honour their vote in the referendum.
Now, Brian's just made a very interesting observation to me while we were watching that, because somebody in the chat box earlier on said, when we're coming to the customs agreement, the customs relationship, that it could end in 20XX. Somebody in the chat box said, well, that's a double cross. But actually, Brian has just made the point that, of course, she's standing in front of the double cross, if you look carefully at that video clip. So this is a double cross. But she said, Theresa said that it's not... she's not acting in a partisan interest. She's not. It's not about personal political interest. It's all about national interest, she said. And I thought to myself when I was listening to that, what did she mean? It's clear that she's not putting her political party first, because the Conservative Party has been ripped apart by this, and it's very, very likely that we're going to see some people leave that for perhaps some kind of centrist party in the not too distant future. It's not in her personal political interest, because her political career has got to be over as a result of this. But perhaps it's in the interest of financial interests, the City of London, in which case, if you look back at what happened to John Major after he left his role as Prime Minister, or Tony Blair after he left his role as Prime Minister, I think they did all right, Brian.
Well, they all do okay.
Yeah,
that's part of the job. But I've got to say, Theresa May has clearly gone to the Harry Potter school of insincere acting. And clearly she paid attention to the advice they gave her.
Well, indeed. But now the question then was, is she going to stay in her job? And the question this morning was all about Michael Gove. Would he resign? Because he was talking, or at least with some speculation that he would. Well, he has ended up saying, I won't be quitting. I want to work with colleagues to ensure the best outcome for the country. So that's excellent stuff. By the time we came on air, Penny Mordaunt had not resigned, nor Liam Fox. So not clear. David Ellis, I'm not clear that actually she is under. I mean, there's still talk of more letters of no confidence going into the 1922 committee, but I'm not clear that she's actually going to be ousted here, because I'm not certain that there actually are enough people that would want to take the job to stand against her.
There's an element of that. Right, okay, let's take this from the top. So unless there can be a majority in the House, unless any government or any party can command a majority, it all starts to go wrong pretty quickly, and the Treasury will step in, all the levers get thrown, and you're going to have a general election. So what do the Tory party know? They know that they can't win a general election as it stands. Okay, I would think that's probably a safe bet. That's why we're playing for time at the moment. The polls are probably suggesting that it will be a Labour victory. Now, if there's a Labour victory, then, forget Brexit, that's gone. That's, as Chris Parry said, they'll kick it in the stingers. So May there's really, her speech is about a bit of a playing for time manoeuvre. She knows there's going to be a leadership battle, within a short space of time, maybe days, something like that. So this is a given. There's going to be a leadership battle. Okay, and that means that there's then going to only go one or two ways. So we have a leadership battle, a new leader, and they can or cannot command a majority. So in that event, if the new leader can or cannot command a majority one way or the other, it's a bit like general election kerplunk. And it'll all just be thrown into gear and there will be a GE. It's as simple as that. Now, the new centrist party may well come into being at this point, because maybe the Tory party brand is now so tarnished that there isn't going to be a vote, so we'll start something new. But May there, once again, in her speech, cited security and so on, which is obviously a more covering for defence union. So what's going to happen if there's a leadership battle today, tomorrow, or something like that? Can we guarantee that EU defence union, military union is going to be aired during this period? What are all those Tory MPs going to be doing? Will they now speak about this? Or will they be preoccupied with the new leader and all this shenanigans? So I would bet that we're going to get nothing's going to get aired. We're going to end up with a bit of a close down. They'll all go internal, and we're not going to get this thing dealt with while this is going on. Even then, when we do get a new leader, or if there is a new leader in there, what's going to happen then? So the kerplunk thing is going to really, the general election kerplunk game is going to be unveiled pretty quickly, because believe you me, the Treasury are not going to allow this to carry on. There will be intervention, and the consequences really are whether we get one side or the other to air military union, and that will be where the majority will be found, if we can do that, or the majority for the good, shall I say. So that's the key to all this, really, in a nutshell. A lot to take on board, but that's really where we are. Probably Graham Brady's already got the letters and they're just sitting on it, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Brexit, maybe Brexit. Let's just have a look at this. The subject is medicines and healthcare products regulatory agency that I happen to be looking at this morning. I had a look at their business plan, because of course they're no longer civil servants, they're in business. And I was fascinated by this line here, that they're going to be managing a transition to operation after the UK's exit from the EU. What do they know that we don't? Where the agency will have a different role in both global and European regional regulatory networks for medicines and devices. So we're leaving, but we're not leaving. This is the classic, but here we find it buried in quite an innocuous document in government. Now, why was I looking at this subject? Well, I have to say that David Noakes, who's formerly one of the editors of UK Column and did much good work, then went on to try and help people who had cancer, and he's now to appear for sentencing at Southwark Crown Court at 10 o'clock on this coming Monday. And if anybody is in the London area and can get up for this this court hearing, can you please do so? It's likely to last several days. This is for the sentencing, but we believe important
mitigation,
thank you, Mike, will be brought forward because David has already pleaded guilty to the charge that he was basically providing medicines which weren't licensed. The British government not interested in did he and his team manage to help anybody. It's simply that they breached the licensing rules. So this hearing is going to be very, very important for what part the mitigation plays, because we have seen ourselves evidence of people who say that their recovery or apparent recovery as a result of David's firm's treatment was quite outstanding. So this is a very, very important case. This is a little bit of comment from Ian Crane. This is a result of a letter from David Noakes. He's talking about the concealment of medicines which have a beneficial effect for cancer. And he's pointing out that there is an unhealthy relationship between the government's regulatory body and Big Pharma. Ian Crane has spoken on Humanity versus Insanity. This is September, which you can find on the website if you want to have a look. But that's the details of that hearing. So if you can help by attending, particularly if you can stay in for the duration of the hearing, possibly 5 days, we would be very grateful because we desperately need the feedback. Another lady who's still in prison is Sabine McNeill, child abuse campaigner. She's much as Melanie Shaw in prison on remand, but she's also going to be heard in one of the chambers at Southwark Crown Court this coming Monday. And this 74-year-old lady brutalised in prison. She suffers from very severe arthritis, and she's had a truly horrible time, but apparently the British government regards her as too dangerous to let out. What's her crime? Pointing out that the government has covered up yet another child abuse case in Hampstead. If you want to write to Sabine, she does really appreciate getting letters. Here's her address, which is Sabine McNeill, A8115EC, HMP Bronzefield, Woodthorpe Road, Ashford, Surrey, TW15 3JZ. And very important that we give her support.
Just a reminder, just a couple of days left for any UK Column members to get a preview of David Ellis's presentation from the defence briefing that we ran a couple of weeks ago. These videos will be going out publicly in a couple of days' time. So, but get a look at them earlier than that if you're a member on the UK Column forums. And finally, on the ad front, a reminder of AV 9.1, Democracy in Chains, taking place on Sunday the 2nd of December from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the Crown Plaza Hotel in London. And Brian, you will be speaking about that. What are you covering?
Well, I'm actually covering, Mike, who they are. This is a term which is used constantly by a lot of people, including ourselves. I'm going to be trying to take the lid off who exactly the people are who are causing such horrific problems and chaos in our society. And I think it's, if I may say, I think it's going to be a very interesting subject because it takes us into some pretty interesting areas. But we are seeing dramatic events unfold around us. Can we simply say it's those nasty politicians, or is there something far deeper going on in the deep state? And talking of the deep state, we must speak about Melanie Shaw. Melanie Shaw, they are now looking at a Section 48 under the Mental Health Act. This would be to detain her in a high security mental health unit, Rampton. To date, she's had no fully qualified psychiatric assessment, no explanation given as to how she was certified fit to plead and then days later was reported incoherent in court. And documents are held which show that Nottingham Mental Health Services have already admitted that they failed to give her the necessary mental health care and support. And don't forget that there's been a really truly spectacular cover-up of all the publicity around Beechwood Children's Home, which Melanie blew the whistle. We've also seen the cynical use of Melanie's case by Tommy Robinson to help further his right-wing agenda, which is clearly supported to try and achieve this breakdown of UK politics. And can we do something about this? Well, we've obviously got to speak out about it all. But I'm just going to end by saying that Salford, there's a British Constitution event, which is in St Sebastian's Centre. That's 12 to 6. That is this coming Saturday. So if you want to get along to that and talk to people about what they are doing and what can be done, that is the event for you. That brings us to the end of today's news. I'll thank our two guests, thank both the Davids for joining us. What a state of affairs that UK's in. And I'm going to end by saying, if you are one of the one of the people watching UK Column at the moment on a free subscription, please will you consider supporting us properly by a subscription. And we're particularly asking for people to take out lifelong membership. This is to give us a boost in what we do. We would like to report more news. We need greater flexibility, and we can only get that with more money coming into the column. So if you're not contributing, please whether you consider doing it, and a lifelong subscription would be immensely helpful. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.